Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch session and also innovation session. We're now going to move to the final leg of this evening. And so thank you for those of you who have made it back into the room. I don't want to keep us for too long. So for this session, the focus is the road to COP28, the Insurance, Resilience, and Adaptation Agenda. We've heard so much about COP, the need to engage on climate change, to need to engage and participate and actively be present at the COP conferences. The IDF has always had a very clear path in terms of our contribution towards the discussions and the negotiations that are happening in the context of COP. So this session is really to unpack that. And so I want to hand over to Francis Bouchard, who is the Managing Director Climate for Marsh McLennan, to lead us through this session. So over to you, Francis.
Thank you, Echo Shui, and Michelle, and tell Mario, show Mario, look, I'm not, no paper, okay? So he taught me this. So look, we have a wonderful panel, and we're going to be joined by someone from the Etherland at some point here, so don't be alarmed when a very large face pops up on the screen. But we're really fortunate to have real leaders who are having an impact and really driving, in some ways, the COP and the adaptation agenda to be with us today. And we were just remarking how the whole topic of adaptation has really started to really take its, I think, due place in importance in the COP process. You know, it was only a few years ago when you'd mention adaptation and people would think you're a defeatist. You know, oh, you don't think we're going to make 1.5, or wait, we don't have to think about that yet. But as Selwyn was just, or Ambassador Hart, but I know I'm still not comfortable with that, but was remarking, you know, the disasters keep happening. So the adaptation issue, I think, is rising in prominence, but it also has some unique challenges, right? I mean, it is inherently local. So it is very difficult to get together at these austere, wonderful global summits and kind of come up with a solution when the ultimate answer depends on where in the river, or what side of the river, or you know, where it's hotter in this neighborhood and that neighborhood, where there's a hill, where there are trees. I mean, it is inherently local, which I think is an additional challenge that those of us who are really focused on trying to help the world adapt to climate change face. Another challenge I think we face is, you know, the mitigation side has this beautiful North Star of 1.5, right? All I had to say was 1.5. Everyone in this room knows what 1.5 means. Most of the world now knows what 1.5 means. Whether you think we're going to achieve 1.5 or not achieve 1.5. We do, that wasn't a question. Keep the microphones away, okay? We don't have that on adaptation. We're still talking in almost like a Tower of Babel when it comes to, you know, what I think about adaptation. And as to insurers, we may have a different idea, right? As a diplomat who's driving it on a global level, maybe a totally different. So, you know, we haven't really coalesced our language. So I think that's another additional challenge. But this is starting to change. And I think for those of you who attended the COP last year or watching it closely, you can see the language changing and you can see the activity changing. And one area in particular that I think is relevant for the insurance sector in particular was the work that really was an extension of the UN high-level champions and the Rock Center focus on adaptation in the insurance sector, where in the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda, the insurance industry for the first time was actually recognized as a critical stakeholder in this effort on climate adaptation. We were right there, right alongside government and right alongside private investors. So I think the insurance sector is being asked to come in, and I think the IDF is really what has created the credibility with a lot of these stakeholders, and in the focus on impact. What is it? Ambition, action, impact. Got it. Well, it's right there in front of me too, so I could have cheated. I didn't though. But I think it's created the accountability, or the credibility, because IDF has been so focused on action. So I think when we look at adaptation today, and we look at the leadership we have on the dais with me and above me here soon, you know, I think it's we're building the momentum, right? And I think we'll start to see, you know, commitments made, the loss and damage discussion, which I suspect we'll touch on here today. Yeah. Yes? Okay, good. The global shield, which we've touched on already, but it just shows that the world, I think, is really coming to grips with the complexity, but also the scale of the challenge and the key stakeholders that need to be part of it. So let's get to kind of the leaders that we have here. I'll turn first to Antoine. who is I think you probably know, he's the chairman of AXA, a role you took over a year ago.
Absolutely.
And who was that gentleman you took? I can't remember his name. Who was he? I'm kidding. An architect.
Ask Michel.
Yes, an architect of the IDF. So Antoine has had a wonderful career both in the public and the private sector. He was with the European Monetary Committee. He started with the French Finance Ministry, was an advisor to Pascal Lamy, but also in and out of government in the law field, and created a very successful partnership called BDGS Partners. It's a law firm where he's now a partner. So, you know, the insurance background, the legal background, the public policy background is really unique, and we're thrilled that you're here to join us. Also have Selwyn Hart here, Ambassador Hart, who's Rowan yesterday said all roads lead to Selwyn, but he didn't say why. Right? I mean, it's like he's a traffic cop or something. And in some ways you probably are, right? But he's a special advisor to the Secretary General of UN on climate issues, and has a bunch of other roles as well, as Deputy Secretary General of the Climate Action Team. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, is that that first 2 days when the 150 world leaders show up? Is that the climate action that you focus on?
Yeah, so the Climate Adaptation Summit of the SG, it's going to be during the high-level week. But if you're talking about the COP, that's the focus of the COP presidency. So
got it. All right. Well, it's hard to keep all you guys track, who does what. But it's a circus, right? With the 150 leaders that come into town. And
no comment.
Yeah. See, where I was going to go with that, I was going to say, a circus has many different roles. Yeah. Which is yours at the circus, right? I assume it has a shovel involved in it,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But there's also, I mean, we're here really as a result of the Paris Agreement in some ways, and your fingerprints are all over the Paris Agreement. So, we are working with a real leader here, and the fact that he was willing and able, in fact, insisted on coming here, not just to give a speech and get the hell back to New York, but to stay here for 2 days and engage with those of us bilaterally and collectively, I think says incredible amount, not only about you and Selwyn, but also about Secretary General willingness to let you do that, because I suspect he has some other tasks for you when you get home. Now, we're going to be joined, and I'm going to introduce him now so that it's easier to kind of transition, but we're also going to be joined by Jürgen Zattler, who is the Director General for International Development Policy at BMZ. And I think everybody in this room certainly knows that the German government, in particular BMZ, has really been the leader in really identifying funding or providing funding, coalescing funding, talking about funding, talking about insurance and resilience. So, to have a leader within the leader showing leadership on a leading issue, I mean, I think I had it written better. It kind of worked when I wrote it down. But it shows that the audience at the IDF can bring together is quite unique and is really kind of setting the agenda on these topics. So, Antoine, maybe you could start off with a few minutes of your initial thoughts. What are you thinking about COP28? What are you thinking maybe about what you've heard over the last couple of days, and really the role the insurance sector has to play in this challenge of climate adaptation?
Well, first, I must say, Francis, that I agree with most what you just said.
What do you not agree with?
Well, I do not agree, of course, on what you said on me.
Oh, yes, I should have read the entire 3-page that your staff gave me.
But I agree with the rest. You are perfectly right to say that we are building momentum. And if we try to go a little bit further, I would say a few remarks in the perspective of COP28 and the role of insurance. First, the climate challenge is obviously the main challenge of the next decades. Look at the situation. If we take some figures, sorry for that.
No, go ahead.
Last year, the cost of natural disaster throughout the world has been $275 billion. Less than 50% of these damages have been covered by insurance. And of course, we all know that it is mainly in the developing world that where the insurance penetration rate is very weak, that people are suffering.
I'm sorry, but Selwyn, it used to be, I've been in this industry for 30 years, it used to be that insurance executives would be like, oh, there was a big event in the Philippines, oh, luckily it wasn't insured, right? Oh, luckily that's not the case anymore, right? No. It's just what you're saying. It is, my goodness, there's still this much that's not insured and we need to close that gap. Sorry to interrupt,
no,
there's
no,
incredible
right.
difference over the last
right.
10 or 15 years.
Yeah. You're right, and the problem or the supplementary problem issue is that public budgets are facing huge constraints, and it will clearly be up to the private sector to take its role to address this issue. Given the level of public debt, we cannot. This is what our friend Greco said this morning. We cannot count on the states to do the job alone. And insurers, of course, are at the heart of the debate. They are at the heart of the debate because they have the knowledge, so they can educate and improve awareness of the situation. They are risk takers, so they can assess and assess the risks, and of course repay the damages. And they are, and that's the most important, they are partners. They have an increasing role to play to develop advice, prevention, and to help people and companies to protect themselves. And at AXA, we have developed an approach which is called payer to partner to explain, illustrate this new role of insurers. And if we want to have a comprehensive view of the situation, we should not forget that insurers are also investors. And
that was going to come up one way or another, wasn't it?
In their capacity as investors, of course, they can play a decisive role through their green investment strategy to actively contribute to the fight against climate change.
I tried to ask Mario a question this morning, and it wasn't the first time he didn't answer one of my questions, right? But I'm going to ask you the same question. Do you think our role as a sector will be around this risk signaling role, this canary in the coal mine role, or will it be to catalyze solutions that go beyond the risk transfer role that we play in society? Because the risk transfer part of it we're seeing already is being challenged, right? With insurance markets around the world are being disrupted, perhaps, and we're starting to. So I just wonder, what role do you think we're going to play as a sector in really being part of the answer? Or maybe it's the investment side as well, but.
Well, I think that, as I just said, insurers will have an increasing role, not only to insure, not only to invest, but to develop a service approach and to have a societal project. But obviously, they cannot do that alone. And we will not have satisfactory and efficient answers if there are no collective actions and public-private solutions put on the table.
Well, it's a great intro then to a leader from the UN. Now, one thing you might not know, though, Selwyn, is in the past, with complex societal risks, the insurance industry has found ways to step up, lean in, and help society figure them out. And Rowan, I think, has written a book, or at least thesis after thesis over it. But the one that really stands out to me is the electricity. So when electricity first was going to be deployed on a large-scale basis, the insurance industry sent some smart risk engineers out there to take a look at it, and they were scared. It was all wooden houses, and it was wires that had fire. So rather than go back and think that, this electricity thing is going to be a pricing issue, the insurance industry created a body called Underwriters Laboratory, which tested every electronic device in this room and essentially made the world safe for electricity. That's what we did. What's the UN going to do on climate?
Well, we have the Paris Agreement.
Yes. Sorry to tee you up that way, but we have done this before.
Yeah. But Francis, thank you so much, and it's really great to be here with you and Antoine, and to pick up on the point that you made in your introduction. One of the reasons why I decided to spend 2 days here was really in recognition of the important and critical role that the industry is playing and must play in addressing and helping us to solve the climate crisis. We're not in a good place, as I said yesterday, but I am confident, and it's just not island optimism. I am absolutely confident that we can solve this crisis, and it requires a level of commitment. It requires a level of collaboration and cooperation that we've not seen before as it relates to approaching a global challenge. And platforms like the IDF are absolutely essential. We need unprecedented, and we say this all the time, unprecedented levels of coordination and collaboration and cooperation if we are going to solve this problem. And we're living in a world that's deeply divided. The geopolitical divisions are well known. The North-South divide is we're not in a good place. But I believe that platforms like this, right, where we have companies and leaders from developing countries, from different parts of the industry, these are the types of platforms that can bring us to solutions. To answer your other question on the role of the industry, and I see a dual role. First, as insurers, we need your ingenuity, and I heard that a lot yesterday, creativity, and really helping us to address some of the challenges, especially faced by the developing world, in terms of saving lives and protecting livelihoods and building financial resilience. It's absolutely essential. The developing world, they're being pummeled by the climate crisis. When you look at the impacts, they're disproportionately spread in the developing world. And as Antoine said, these are countries that are struggling with high levels of debt. I believe about close to 50 to 60 developing countries are on the verge or close to some form of debt distress. There's very little fiscal space, and in many instances, heard a conversation yesterday, countries are being faced with very hard choices. Am I able to feed the people in my country? Am I able to send kids to school or invest in building resilience to climate change, or even paying the premium of parametric risk insurance facility? So these are many of the hard choices that folks in the developing world are currently confronting. But also as investors, as insurers, we need your creativity, we need you to help us, we need your innovation. But as investors, that role is equally important. And working together, we know that we need to accelerate the decarbonization of economies. And it must be done this decade, not after 20, it must be done. We need to accelerate efforts this decade. Global emissions need to be reduced by 7% annually over the course of the next few years before 2030. Global emissions must peak before 2025. Do you know 75% of global emissions, they're in the developing world? If the G7 and the EU were to reduce their emissions to zero now, we still would not be able to keep the 1.5 degree goal alive. And this is not to blame by any stretch of the imagination the developing world. What it clearly shows is we need to help these countries. we really need to get the finance flowing at pace and scale to the developing world to help these countries decarbonize their economies and decarbonize key sectors as quickly as possible. And Ruth, I think it was you who mentioned, I think it was Ruth, I don't want to pick on Ruth, but...
Go ahead, pick on. Pick on a pregnant lady. That's
yeah, exactly. but you said it right yesterday, adaptation, investments, I think it was Ruth, if I'm not mistaken, but investments as you all, the industry also need to focus on investments in adaptation and resilience building as well. And the challenges, again, in the developing world, it is this capacity issue, right? We hear from the developing countries, we have in our national adaptation plans, in our NDCs, we have identified our adaptation priorities. But as one of the colleagues said yesterday, when my friend from the World Bank, Ethiopic, when these projects come and put on the table, they're not bankable. So how can we help these countries to turn their adaptation and resilience priorities, be it infrastructure, agriculture, water? It's three main sectors, right? How can we help them, accompany them to turn these adaptation priorities into bankable projects? And the financial mix, and it will be different to a mitigation or an emissions reduction project, but we really need to help these countries to turn these priorities into actual bankable projects. So for me, the agenda is very clear. It's about acceleration on all fronts, but the only way that we're going to get it done is if we work together. So that's why I'm here.
So there's a lot of consistency. Thank you. Really appreciate that. The topic of loss and damage, obviously the last COP, kind of teed that up for what will happen in Dubai in the fall. I was in Dubai earlier this week talking to some of the UN presidency staff, and they heard I was with Marsh McLennan, the world's largest broker, and they said, "Oh, insurance, it's all we're talking about in the L&D." And what part of it is we might just buy insurance for everyone. And I thought at first, wow, that's great because I work for a broker, but there needs to be more than that, right? I mean, it can't just be buy insurance and kind of call it a day, right? I mean, that's why we're here talking about adaptation. I mean, there needs to be a focus on actually reducing the risk and then obviously finding ways to finance or transfer the remainder. But what do you expect to see from an L&D perspective I know you can't predict, and at least I wouldn't suggest you predict, but how do you see that proceeding, and what are your hopes perhaps for where that might end up in terms of not just the insurance sector role, but more importantly, how it can help the countries you were just talking about?
Yeah. So the decision at COP27 to create this loss and damage fund was historic in many ways. 30 years of climate negotiations and I wasn't there from the beginning, but I was a negotiator. Don't hold it against me. A climate negotiator in a past life, and this topic of loss and damage. I remember at one of the COPs it was after Copenhagen. It was for my last COP in Doha, I think in like 2012, or I thought I was finished with climate at that time. We had a big battle on loss and damage because it has always been a very contentious issue. It's been like, folks have been calling it reparations and compensation and blah, blah, blah. So the decision was very historic in many ways. We know that losses and damage are increasing and will get even worse. We're at 1.1 degrees of warming, and as you said, we're seeing record and unprecedented losses and damage. Insurance must be an essential part of that toolbox. But we need a toolbox. It is a toolbox. We need an arsenal of solutions, and loss and damage is already being done. There's insurance. There's contingent credit facilities in the MDBs. There's a broad range of instruments already being deployed to address loss and damage. my hope, my own personal hope, is that three really big issues will be solved this year to ensure that this fund that the finalization of design and operationalization of the fund can take place. Form follows function, right? So the function, what is this new fund going to address? The function of the fund needs to be decided this year in the work of the transitional committee. From that should flow the form, right? If the function is to address, slow onset events, or if the function is that it will address extreme weather events and address humanitarian crises, then you can't have a GCF type body, right? Now, this is not endorsing any approach. I think I must say that. So, function first, form, right? What will this look like? If you're dealing with, and I've heard many developing countries speak about, we need something that's fast dispersing to address extreme weather events or extreme climatic events. Then you need a very flexible governance structure, nothing too rigid, etc. And the third is, how's this thing going to be sourced, right? Is it contributions? Do you have to go through a multi-year replenishment process? Are you going to use innovative sources of finance? Financial transaction tax, or are they going to be innovative sources? And I think if the transitional committee, of course, with the thought leadership, and I'm not going to let you guys off the hook, with the thought leadership of many of the entities in this room who are already, like, sorry to put you on the spot, but like the World Bank, the MDBs have been doing this. I sat on the board of one of them. I know that they're doing this. They've been talking about this, right? It will require the thought leadership of all of you, right? To address these, so that decisions on this issue of function, form, and sourcing can be finalized this year, so that something is ready and in a shape to start helping and supporting the developing world. I don't know how far it will get, but given the urgency of the challenge, I'm honestly hopeful. This should not be a multi-year exercise, right? It needs to be something that is ready. It can be improved over years. It can be improved. It can be enhanced as we go along. But I think it's absolutely essential that at the COP, those that have been calling for advances on loss and damage for the last 30 years, and those that are already facing climate impacts on the front line, that they have something that can give them some degree of hope.
And I get the sense the presidency is very, very much focused on this.
Yeah.
Let's take a slight diversion here. And it's been referenced a little bit, and it's not actually an adaptation issue, but let's maybe deal with it quickly, because I think it's a little bit of an elephant in the room, and that's the NZIA developments and what's happened there. Wonder, maybe OXA has been instrumental in these efforts. I wonder if you might have some initial observations, and then, Selwyn, I know that you have some strong opinions as well. Antoine?
Well, important question. NZIA, as we all know in this room, the purpose of this alliance was to jointly define methodologies and standards to measure greenhouse gas emissions in the activity of insurance. Okay, and the Alliance did a fantastic job for that. And we can say now that the job is done. We have the methodology we needed. And by the way, it has been prepared and in an open source manner, which means that this methodology is accessible to everybody, to those who can have an interest in using it. And it is now up to private companies on an individual basis to define their own climate strategy and to set their own targets using the standards, but of course in a totally autonomous manner. And that's why a number of participants, given that the job had been done, a number of participants, among which AXA, have decided to exit the alliance, which is no longer really needed. And we all know that these decisions have been taken in a specific political context, which is the doubts raised by in some states in the United States about the legal implications, the political and legal implications of this démarche. There is no ambiguity at all, as I just said, about the purpose of the alliance, which was just to define a methodology, but to be sure that there would be no ambiguity, we, with some other players, felt that it was preferable not to maintain the alliance or to keep within the alliance, which was less necessary than it was in the past.
And so, and I know you touched upon this a little bit yesterday, but I mean, it must be a challenge for those of you who have committed your careers and a good chunk of your lives to the reduction of CO2 emissions, to see, you know, kind of legal tools used to kind of push back on that.
Yeah. Ingrid and I, we survived the COP in Copenhagen in 2009, so we know the ups and downs, highs and lows. But a bit of positive from this entire exercise, you know. In 2019, it's like 4 years ago, just 4 years ago, only 10% of emissions around the world were covered by a net zero goal. Today, it's over 90%. Some of the net zero goals and targets globally are certainly, we're working to get countries to make them even more ambitious. All of the G7, all of the EU, and a large chunk of emerging economies have committed to net zero by 2050. Vietnam, a country, Ingrid, that we've worked very closely with Joachim under Germany's really great G7 presidency last year, made a commitment at COP26 to achieve net zero by 2050. A country that in 1993, only 14% of the population had access to electricity. Right? A country with a per capita income under $2,500, but has made a very ambitious commitment to net zero. So the net zero wave globally over the course of the last few years, 3 to 4 years, has grown exponentially. Right? So we're now at a stage where it is becoming real in governments and in the private sector. And it is obviously scaring vested interests who have this very vested interest in the status quo and in a high carbon economy. So the fact that the industry and other parts of the system, and also governments as well, are receiving this type of treatment is not surprising, and we've seen it around other issues like tobacco, for example. So again, this is why I'm here to encourage and challenge the industry. But governments need to step up, right? And make it, first of all, we need mandatory regulations. And this was one of the key recommendations coming from the report of the Secretary General's high-level expert group that Catherine McKenna and a group of about 17 other experts from around the world chaired. We really need to move to mandatory regulations around net zero. But in the interim, it needs to be made clear by national governments and regulators that having the industry or companies working together to save and to protect lives falls within the rules, laws, and regulations of various jurisdictions. Right? What is also very encouraging is that despite leaving, and Antoine mentioned this, despite leaving the insurance alliance, and we get it, no one wants to be, bothered with litigation. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an economist, but I can't imagine how lawyers, some of my best friends are lawyers.
Don't apologize. Some of my best friends are diplomats.
Unlucky.
No one wants to be bothered with this stuff. But even those that have left have not retreated from the commitments that they've made in terms of presenting credible transition plans, having plans that cover scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So movement is still taking place, but ultimately we need regulations and we need national governments and other jurisdictions to step up.
I agree. Sorry.
Yep.
I totally agree with what you said, but I think that what matters is not alliances or organization. What matters is the level of ambition.
Exactly.
And net zero is a very stimulating objective. And we should all work in our each capacities to contribute to the achievement of this goal. And if governments, international organizations can fight for that, that would help to create the good political environment, and that will facilitate the decisions by private companies to develop their own strategies consistent with these political and global objectives.
I'm going to try to wrestle this back to adaptation, because even Mickey Mouse gets attacked in the United States politically. So, we're in good company there. All right, Jürgen's back with us. So can we throw him up here? And just to be a little disciplined, we have a very hard stop in about 12 to 13 minutes. But Jürgen, we'd love to hear your and BMZ's perspective, perhaps on some of the new finance frameworks. I know you're deeply involved in all of that work. So thank you again for coming back and overcoming the technology challenges that we've just gotten so used to.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and apologies. We are in the midst of budget negotiations, and I had to talk with a meeting with the state secretary, and then the technology also wasn't very helpful. So I'm very, very sorry about that. But you asked me to talk a little bit about the new financing architecture. So I hope that this will be not all very well known by you, but perhaps a little bit our perspective. We are facing this climate crisis, and we are all aware that we need a lot of money, but also a framework to address efficiently those challenges. And it's about mitigation, it's about adaptation, and it's also about residual risk. Our take is that the architecture is not fit for that purpose. And therefore, we started already years ago to ask the World Bank to better deal with global challenges, global public goods. And climate is the most important one. We asked years ago, for example, in the last capital increase negotiations, we already succeeded to establish a global public good window. But the time changed, and now, you know, the situation is a different one than a few years ago. Now, with all that crisis, I think people are becoming more aware that that's an issue. That the banks, the MDBs should not only focus, you know, helping countries in their development, a country-based model, but also take into account the global challenges and the global public goods we need to provide. So that's one issue. The other one is that, and that's a little bit linked to the summit in Paris, that we have to look at the World Bank, at the MDBs, but also a little bit broader. And there we are talking about changing the architecture, for example, with regard to debt treatment, the climate resilient clauses, and many other issues. And some of them are also linked with loss and damage and the residual risks we are discussing here in that context. So that's our perspective. We have also brought into the process of the financing summit a number of proposals, and I don't have the time to go through it, but we are very convinced that this is something, you know, which is operationalized and which can bring us forward. Going back to the residual risk issue, we all know climate-related loss and damage that can devastate communities and roll back decades of development. However, the crisis financing system still relies to a large extent on ex-post UN appeals and discretionary pledges. And we're risking that all our money, development money, goes into ex-post reaction. And that's very inefficient. And we can't afford, nothing will be left for development. Therefore, it's so important to find more efficient approaches. And this has a lot to do with pre-arranged financing. And our proposal on the global shield is all about pre-arranged financing. So I would like to emphasize, because the issue came up again only a few minutes ago, it's not only about insurance. We are facing different climate-related risks. Some of them are, let's say, they have different types. They are of different type. And we all know that insurance approaches can tackle with some types of risks, but not with others. Therefore, we have enlarged the global shield and are now discussing with the Pathfinder countries approaches which are tailor-made for their countries, but in principle they could cover macro instruments like the debt clauses, but also micro instruments like insurance. So we are very open. It depends on the country and the protection gap and the type of risks the country is facing, how we want to address that. And therefore, I think our partnership is so important. And the partnership with you, with V20, with also the G7, the G20, and with our multilateral partners. And of course, the private sector plays an important role. So perhaps I stop here because I understand that time is very short today, but I'm very ready to go more in depth with one or the other issue I've just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and you're absolutely right. There's so much to unpack in terms of what you're doing and the leadership that you and BMZ are providing here, but we are kind of running low here. Maybe we can, I don't know if there are final comments here because we only have about 5 or 6 more minutes here, but maybe observations for us to think about on our flight back. I mean, you've issued some pretty serious calls to action for the industry. I think the industry is ready and willing and able. I think Echo Shui has shown that by the meeting we've pulled together here. But any final words you might have for the sector, if you haven't already said them in the 2 days you've been here?
I'll just reiterate what I've been saying, and it's important for us to look at how we work together, not only this year, going into COP28, but over the course of the coming years. And approaches like the Global Shield, approaches like the Secretary General's Early Warning Systems for All initiative, or the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, right, which bring together different stakeholders to deliver at pace, scale, and impact. The reality is that a developing country having to have one conversation on how to address climate risk, or how to strengthen its early warning system, or how to accelerate its energy transition, right, is ideal, absolutely better than that developing country having 6 conversations, 7 conversations on each of these separate issues. So if we're able, as a global community, and using platforms like the IDF, right, to bring together stakeholders around common solutions, early warnings, accelerating energy transition, addressing risk and adaptation through the Global Shield. This needs to be the organizing principle. This needs to be the theory of change in how we engage with the developing world. Because if we continue, right,
yeah,
with these separate conversations, and Ingrid, and it was through the leadership of Germany and its G7 president, Joachim Flashbar, who unfortunately, Jürgen, you're good representative of
He's a great representative.
Yeah. Right? But he really pushed the G7 really to rally around Vietnam, India, and Indonesia, and South Africa on the Just Energy Transition Project. And that has made a decisive difference in supporting these countries. And we believe that that's the approach that we need to adopt as a global community. So if there's one thing you take away from the little I've said over the course of the last 2 days, collaborate and cooperate to deliver at pace, scale, and impact.
Strong message. Thank you. Jürgen, maybe go back to you for really a very quick minute or 2 answer if possible. But this architecture work that you all are playing a really heroic role on. I mean, it's not just money, right? I mean, this is about coordination, about common priorities, about efficiencies. Do you think there's a shared ambition among all the stakeholders to really step up and make this COP and these efforts perhaps lasting and as impactful as perhaps we all want them to be? And again, minute or 2, please. I think you're on mute.
Yes, that's of course a key question. We have to bring on board all the stakeholders. That's clear, and there must be something in it for everybody and all the countries. But when you look at global public goods, we are talking primarily about climate, about biodiversity, about the pandemics, and about instability, fragility. And some say the agenda is for middle-income countries because we feel that we need more concessional money for middle-income countries. But it's not really true. I mean, look at the fragility issues. For example, the poor countries in the Sahel would benefit a lot. So it's a complex reform. It's not such an easily understandable reform. And therefore, we need some time to discuss and to understand. And I'm quite confident. Another point, it's not only about public money, and this links to what our group here. It's about private money. When we want to finance this transition towards sustainability, we need a lot of money, and the 100 billion is just a little bit, a small part of it. So we have to unleash the private sector to invest into renewables, to invest into e-transport, and therefore we have to make a market. And that's, I think somebody talked about regulatory reforms. We need regulatory reforms. In principle, they cost nothing, They save money because we can't finance the whole transition without regulatory reforms. It's much too much. And what we do in Germany is to adapt, for example, to adapt regulations to formulate emission standards in order to create e-transport markets. So we have to create markets, and public money is important in that context. But the ultimate aim is to unleash the private money flowing into those sectors.
I think that's a common theme, this unleashing of the market and unleashing of the private sector forces. Antoine, maybe you have the last word here. Particularly, we have about a minute and a half before we meet your deadline. So if we pass it, it's your fault.
Absolutely. Well, what we are talking about is, in a generic term, is public-private partnership. And I'm absolutely convinced that's the good answer. That's a good answer, not only for finance reasons, even if there are good reasons, and the fact that a public body can guarantee a project or add some money can be leveraged by the private sector. But the most important is that public-private partnership allows to pool expertise, different but complementary expertise. So, of course, we must not be naive. There are difficulties to define and implement projects. Difficulties because we have to align the goals of the various actors. We also have to deal with the inevitable bureaucracy of such projects. But that's the only way for me, if it is well managed, and an organization like IDF is has a lot of credit and experience to offer in that respect. That's the only way to have comprehensive answers to the need and challenge we have to face.
So very quickly, because we're at our time here, one, I want to say thank you to the panelists, Jürgen, Ambassador, and Antoine. I mean, obviously, this was about the road to COP, and these issues are very serious and timely, and that road is an uphill road, but I hope everybody will join us on the journey. So I want to say thank you, and thank you to the audience, and good luck.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much, Francis.
Thank you.
Merci.
No, fantastic.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Francis, for that. An excellent discussion. So I'll keep it moving so that we are swiftly. I'd like to invite Rowan Douglas, Chair of the IDF Operating Committee, to guide us through the final discussion of the IDF Summit, which is really a discussion on delivering on our purpose and ambition and really looking towards the future IDF leadership outlook. So over to you, Rowan, to guide us through this.
Thank you so much. Michelle, Ethiopius, I invite you to, I think we're having a manel. That's not right, is it? I'd like some, is it the second one?
You having a what?
We've only got two chairs. I'll hold back.
We had a brilliant discussion before this on
Need a chair.
women
The third one. We need it.
Oh, the third
Barbara
one,
and Rita,
okay.
yeah.
And so it is just extraordinary. Thank you, Selwyn, for mentioning two brilliant women in your interventions. But it does feel, in this day and age, a bit, we're all on that road to COP28.
We are indeed, absolutely. Thank you. All of us. Right, gentlemen. Please take a seat.
I take a seat. Whoppa. Sorry.
I'm actually going to bring in quite a few voices towards. We've got half an hour, so this is what I'd.
We stay with Jürgen.
I think Jürgen isn't. Jürgen, just to let you know, you're off duty now.
But you're welcome to stay.
Okay, so we're having the final half an hour before the summing up from Ekeswe and Michelle, and really this is a half an hour to perhaps collectively discuss the meeting we've had, but also the journey that the IDF has taken, and to some degree reflect on the next 2 years and maybe the next 10 years. So for those of you who have joined the IDF a little bit more recently, it was exactly 10 years ago that the IDF's forming concept note was approved by what was then called the Political Champions Group. So 10 years ago, this group that's gathered and all of us online was nothing more than a piece of paper, and it was lovely to be upstairs yesterday with everybody over dinner and hearing the buzz of something that's moved from concept to reality. And like all journeys, it has some ups and downs. It was probably 2 years to move from conception to birth in 2015. And what was ironic was there were sort of processes going on in the industry that some were getting excited about this potential area. But at the same time, that same curiosity and engagement was happening in the public sector. It's lovely to have Ingrid here with us, because Ingrid was really the person, if I had to pick one person in the public sector who was fomenting this exploration of insurance as a concept to crack development challenges, it was you, Ingrid, and you were mobilizing so much action, and you were prepared to cross the floor, if I can say, to meetings we were holding a little bit like this. And so we then had the next phase, 2015 launch, and I would say the next 2 years, with the help of Stephen Catlin and others in the private sector, but then in the public sector, was the recruitment of senior colleagues as well as senior operational folks. So that phase was, if you like, the recruitment phase. And since then, the next sort of 3 or 4 years, under Denny's leadership, and obviously when Ekeswe arrived, was when we went from, if you like, recruitment and assimilation to development. And what I mean by development was the development of the working groups and the programs. Probably now involve over many hundreds of people, actually. The development of the modalities that allow the public and private sector to move from podium speeches to actual collaboration together with the nitty-gritty of how do you deal with procurement rules between public and private sector? How do we deal with the competition issues in the private sector? Really tough stuff that took 3 or 4 years to get through, as well as then the key developments with, if you like, donors, not least BMZ, which has meant that it's not all perfect. But of course, across the waterfront of the 6 core working groups and streams that we organize, we're truly making tangible progress. So if you like, we've got the kernel of something special. In the meantime, while we've been building this sort of surfboard, which has got a bit bigger, but it's still quite small, this enormous wave of an interest in, you can use whatever buzzwords you want, adaptation, resilience, forecast-based financing, all these themes which 4 or 5 years ago were not but barely spoken about outside of a core committee, are becoming more and more mainstream. So we can see the wave coming. And I suppose if to sort of frame the conversation, where do we need to be as a community in the next couple of years, by the time we get to our 10th anniversary, but also in the next 10 years to make sure that we are not just, frankly, a nice technical blip in the sort of ether, that we've done great things, but has it really moved the dial? But have we become structural and mainstreaming? And we often highlight this theme about mainstreaming. So I think our collective challenge is to figure out the right process, platform, profile, all those magic P words, including principles that are going to help us get there. So would love to get your views, gentlemen, on this panel and actually more widely across this room about some of the things we've got to think about to fulfill the potential that we all have and frankly the duty that we all have. So Ethiopius, if I may, World Bank's been a key partner right from conception. So over to you.
So let me start off by saying I thought this was an excellent summit. It was great to renew some friendships. Some people I hadn't seen in many, many years. And to make new friends. Hopefully, Selwyn, I can be a good friend of yours despite being a lawyer. And I valued sort of the depth and the seriousness of the discussion and the overall quality of the debate. And I realized putting on one of these things is not easy, so my congratulations to the team that did that. And thanks to Zurich for hosting us. I thought, given the theme of, thinking about what has worked well, what should we be doing differently going forward, I'd touch upon something I think the IDF could do more of. Areas where I think the IDF can help. Some thought as to things you may want to test. And areas where it
things
might
that we might want to test.
We the IDF, we the organization, yes. But starting with what we may want to do more of, I think we probably should consider a bold communication strategy with respect to the importance of local insurance markets. Local insurance, because of its and I realize there's a lot of work we're doing vis-a-vis governments or trying to do vis-a-vis governments, but we need to advocate for the importance of a strong sector because of its importance for climate resilience, but also because of its importance for the country's access to capital markets. A strong insurance sector will actually make it easier for them to access capital markets and at cheaper cost. And because having a strong insurance sector is one of the best formulas for dealing with shocks, economic shocks. As I was saying earlier, when you have a strong banking sector, insurance sector, and capital market, you survive shocks far better than only having two of those being strong or one of those being strong. So I think a communication strategy making this case will be very, very important for IDF. Where I think the IDF can help, and I know there's a lot of thought that's being given to pushing for investment in climate relevant projects by the insurance sector. And that's obviously very, very welcome. But more than that, I think helping with preparing existing climate relevant projects that need help in terms of project preparation to make them bankable is as important, if not more important, because otherwise we're chasing after the same projects. There's a lot of money chasing the same projects, whereas what we need to do is to grow the pie of projects, of climate relevant projects, and that's going to require some project preparation, some assistance with that. Another area where help would be useful. We've spoken a lot about financing adaptation. I think it is not straightforward to figure out how you monetize adaptation from a private sector standpoint. So we've worked on a number of projects where we've advised a client on what needs to be done for that project to be resilient. But they're already invested in the project. They're not investing just in the adaptation. It's the overall project, and then we can make the case, listen, you're not going to do that well unless you change a few parameters for this project. There are lots of road projects where we've helped with, water runoff and the like. But purely financing adaptation, I think some ideas on how that might be done, so how you monetize it would be very helpful, because otherwise I think we'll struggle to get private financing of adaptation, independent of a project. Then I think, it would be great if there was some thought given to advocating for valuation standards. And here I have to give you a little bit of my perspective, and Michelle and I were talking about this last night. There are standards for how you manage climate risk. There are standards for how you disclose climate risk. And they're very good standards and very welcome. But I honestly don't believe the private sector will fully embrace, particularly given the political debate around these issues, fully embrace until you're actually able to value climate risk, right? Value the action of, value taking action for it. And once you do that, companies will do it not because it's good, but because it makes financial sense, right? So having alongside performance standards and disclosure standards, having some valuation standards, I think would be enormously helpful, and some thought to how that could be done or how IDF might be able to contribute to that. And finally, as has been said multiple times, tackling the climate challenge is necessarily going to be a public-private partnership, right? We heard that in the earlier panel, and I think that is absolutely the case. In public-private partnerships, trust is at a premium. And I know this as having been a regulator as the arbiter between the public sector and the private sector. That trust is very much grounded in this instance in the quality of the information and the quality of the methodologies and the independence with which they're produced. And here I have to commend Nicola and Nick for the work they've done on GRMA and GRI. And I think maintaining the independence and the quality of what's produced in terms of methodologies and data will be key to the success of this public-private partnership. So that's something to maintain by the IDF. And then I'll say a final word about the relationship between the World Bank Group and the IDF, if you permit me, Rowan. Not taking myself outside IDF, but there is a relationship there, and I think it's been a successful relationship in some respects, and I know that there have been some challenges, right? And reflecting upon that, I think don't be frustrated by what has been difficult in the past, because we're in the process of evolving as an organization, and the evolution is very much about how we work better with the private sector to channel the force of the private sector into development projects, into climate relevant projects. That is the direction of travel. And I think we are at a very important juncture in terms of the relationship between the World Bank Group and private sector actors. And I think it's fruitful ground for deepening the relationship that we've established today. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Michel, Mr. Chair.
I agree. No, it's quite difficult to be complimentary to what Ethiopia say, because he said quite a lot. By the way, I would like to mention a few of the key moments of IDF. I just would like to thank you, Rowan, for your drive in that aspect. I remember the first time we met, it was a kind of dream, and you were probably one of the elements participating to making of this dream something which made sense. It was probably at a time in which, yeah, really, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Take advantage of that. But it's definitely something which was also initiated a little bit before some of the climate debate. It was one of the main concerns was, is it possible that so many people on this planet do not enjoy the pleasure of insurance, which is the way in which we define being our clients? And that's something in which we also need definitively to also accept that There are a few things, I think it has been said several times, which can be said also made on our side. We are an industry which is probably not revolutionized as quickly as some others, meaning that some of the pressure of the efficiency is one on which we need to create the pressure ourselves because of this kind of surprising impression of being protected by the regulators. But I do believe that there is definitively with the technology, and there I do see also a role of IDF, making sure that technology is used also in a way that it doesn't only improve the margin of the existing business, but that it also probably makes sense to address new clients. And that is something which for our industry is, it's always the same story. You concentrate on the existing one, you make of the existing one each time more profitable clients, or you make them each time more happy. And we need all together to accept that independently of all the climate challenge that we have in front of us, there is an enormous shame to have so many people who are so far away from what we consider something which is an added value, which is the insurance. Beside that, I would say, sometimes get the impression that we speak a little bit too much about public-private. We got a challenge. We are a group of people called humanity. If we hear what we speak about, it is definitively a serious challenge, even if from a political standpoint, there is sometimes some movement which brings you to have a kind of negative attitude towards that. But I deeply believe that we have a collective challenge. And one of my dreams would be that even if we belong to the family we belong to, but the problem is probably a little bit too important to continue always speaking about, okay, do you do that on the private side? Is it on the public side? You mix that one, it's public-private partnership, that's very nice. I think it makes sense, but it still probably underlines some aspect on the fact that we have not totally understood the urgency of the matter. We speak about the way to organize ourselves, the enemy is there, in front of the door. So again, it is something which doesn't bring a lot in matters of operational improvement of what IDF can do, but I think that being each time more focused on what we want to achieve and forgetting sometimes in this group of work who do we belong to is something which is highly welcome, because I think that the urgency is there. And we need definitively to make sure that we do not spend too much time about defining what is the specificity of the public sector compared to the specificity of the private sector. There are, I think, many, many more things than we believe that we can do in quite an aligned manner. I must say that I like this combination that we've achieved thanks to the several leaders that we had, between having global ideas about the way in which we can achieve improvement. And there I must say, naively, 8 years ago, I would probably never have understood the importance of risk modeling. It's so important. It's so fantastic to be able to say that we speak about something we know. We don't speak about ideas, but we speak about something, and we contribute to try to know that a little bit better. And also concrete projects like the tripartite. These two dimensions are very important, and I think that mixing the two of them and learning each time from the successful experience that we have in the tripartite in some of the countries is something which makes an enormous sense. I say that this morning or yesterday, this morning I think, there is a risk in this kind of going together of so many organizations, some of which are extremely large, to reinvent a few things. So we need to be very, very careful about the way in which we take the experience which are successful and that we replicate them, not inventing the wheel 10 times. And then I would like to conclude exactly as you begin. Actually, I think there is quite a nice alignment between the welfare of a country and the penetration of the insurance industry. It's not pretending that the insurance industry is simply saving everybody. It's simply underlining that when you can concentrate on buying insurance, it means that you have achieved a certain level, and it reflects a level of evolution. And I do believe that there is a very urgent need to contribute to the development of the local markets, because that's through this development of the local markets that a lot can happen locally. We cannot continue to have, and sorry to say it the way I say it, this Western approach that all what need to be solved on this world will be solved by us. I think that that is something on which we need definitively to make sure that there is an enormous communication effort in order to have local players coming to join us, and maybe not only the large players. Last point, again, philosophical, I'm sorry. Yeah. When you think about the level of energy that we had in 1945 to rebuild something based on the disaster we've been through, I sometimes regret that we didn't create the IDF in 1945 for the simple reason that there was a natural energy, and that's humanity. When you go through a drama and you survive the drama, you can mobilize an energy which is fantastic. For 15, 20 years, maybe not for much more than that, but I just hope, and that is not related to IDF, that as humanity we will learn not to need another big drama before reacting. And sometimes I must say, even if it was not a marvelous period before 45, and it has been, by the way, quite tragic in other countries also after that, but the positive energy that did result of the solution of this conflict and the positive feeling that we all belong to the same adventure is sometimes that I miss. And if in whatever fashion IDF can bring that back, and it's a very ambitious target, but I think that that's the moment in which we start precisely to speak about the targets that we want to achieve more than about the organization that we establish between public and private sector to achieve these targets.
Michelle, very, very well said, and I think sets things up. I'd love to perhaps open the discussion now to everyone, particularly those who perhaps haven't had a chance to speak yet, around how we can, or on any of these themes, or how we can take this adventure forward. I've got one proposal: we will never inadvertently have a men-only panel again. Okay, in our operations, it was inadvertent, I'm sure, but anyway, just want to acknowledge that we will never have another one unless by accident somehow in the IDF, and apologies for that. I think there was a speaker. I'm delighted to say a lady speaker. So there we go. Our collective panel. Over to you.
I have a question to the audience. It's in 2 years from today, because we were talking yesterday about the pressure of 2 years, how would success look like for IDF? And then to the experts, if you would suggest only 3 points of things we shouldn't do, what these 3 points would be.
Okay. So the first question was to the whole audience, was to everybody.
How would success look like in 2 years from today? How do we want to position IDF top of everything?
May I ask what would be success for you? From what?
I want to continue adding value to this amazing platform. I think there is a uniqueness here, and it depends of all of us in this room. But still, there is a greater effort to bring, and I think we need the power from others. We need more private sector in this room next time. We might need customers, the farmers, also to be listened. I think there are a few adjustments to be done, but still I want to hear what is the ultimate target from the IDF in the next short term and long term, because there is an amazing opportunity and a uniqueness here. So I want to really hear that again.
Okay, well, first and foremost, before we come to Michelle and Ethiopius. Would anybody else like to immediately respond to that question or raise any other questions or observations? Ekeswehi, who better? Who better to give us a view? Over to you.
I think that's a great question, Olga, because it's you're asking about, okay, in the short term, where are we going, right? I think that both Michelle and Ethiopius have expressed the longer term, bigger ambition, right? But I think as an institution, we have identified some things that are quite immediate and urgent. And we've talked a lot about ambition, urgency, and all of that. So I do think there are several dimensions to this, which is how do you deliver impact? But as an institution, to deliver that, you have to broaden and bring people into this conversation and drive the innovation that is required. So there's been a lot of work that's been put into the institution to bring leaders, but also practitioners to this exercise. And those practitioners, many of them are actually not in this room. There are colleagues, as I said in the opening, that are in countries doing this difficult work. So we have to think creatively, and I completely agree with you, about the model in terms of how we bring them closer to the conversation. That might mean taking more of a regional approach, and we were discussing this, maybe partner with the Global Asia Insurance platform to look at convening a session within the Asia region to engage our partners there, partner with an institution in Africa. There are different ways in which we can slice and dice this, right? But it's also about the membership bringing those ideas forward to explore that. From my perspective, I was really pleased to see Ashok here, because that's also about, again, local companies that are already active in this space, right? There was also a reference about you're not doing something for someone. It is we are doing together, right? And I think from my perspective, the short term is, have we delivered on the risk analytics element? Have we delivered in terms of the commitments that we have made under the tripartite agreement? Have we delivered on some of the ideas that we are exploring within the infrastructure working group? Have we delivered on making the connections between disaster risk reduction, risk transfer in the things that we do as an institution? So that's an operational, short-term, and I think very clear, targeted sort of deliverable that we can focus. We are focused on, not can, are focused on. But there's a broader philosophical, I think, conversation that we are having, and it's a journey. Right? It's a philosophical conversation with the public sector around risk, around institutions, around structures, around form, as Selwyn had mentioned. And I can't say that you have a solution for that long-term challenge, right? But I think that we do have some of the core pillars in terms of how do we deliver operationally, but how do we take the experience of implementation to also inform what that new structure needs to look like. I don't know if that assists, but those are some of my immediate reactions to your question.
Emma, I wonder if I could bring you in, if I may, because you're a global expert on the resilience and adaptation agenda, as well as being at the sharp end of how that's had to be applied in a country. And yet I think this is your first visit to an IDF meeting, if I'm right. And I would love to get your impressions, if I may, coming as a very knowledgeable, but maybe slight outsider to the insurance sort of community. Any thoughts you think we should take away about how to get our capabilities and our message more widely understood and adapt and implemented into the mainstream? Or any other observations you want to make?
Well, I made an observation just before this panel started, so thank you very much for making a commitment never to have a mammal again, because that's certainly a reaction that I had. But taking it to the breakout sessions, the one that Kathy led on microinsurance delivering for women, I think what was brilliant about that was allowing a very free discussion. It was a very fun discussion where members of the industry were giving live feedback to take what is an innovative bit of microinsurance, how we can scale it up, how we can communicate it to others, and make sure that it's landing incredibly well. So I found that as a way of engaging with more individuals. It was fantastic. I think we were probably 60% women in the group, 40% men, and it was a really lively exchange, helping shape something that is in pilot form that needs to scale up. So those sorts of innovations to take things and move them at pace, I think is something that it would be great to see even more of in future sessions. I love what Ekisue said about taking it out to the different parts of the world. We need to channel in those individuals who are going to benefit from the work of the insurance sector into the discussions. If they can't come here, we go to them, or we make sure that we are channeling those real people who are going to benefit from the work that the IDF is doing. So those are just some early reflections. Great to be reconnected with friends that I've worked on different parts of this climate agenda. But holding up the mirror sometimes to ourselves. I come from the private sector. I spent most of the last 7 years working in the public sector, holding up the mirror for those of us in the private sector and asking ourselves, are we really doing enough right now, even with these wonderful pilots that we're experimenting with? Can we scale them up? And is there more that we can do dipping into our own pockets where perhaps the public sector is unable to do that at the moment? Thank you.
Super. Thanks so much, Emma. And thanks for coming, and you're very welcome to come back to the IDF any time. I saw there's Emma, isn't it? I think, yeah. And then we'll come over to this corner here. There's a cluster of hands.
Not to continue to drag you on the issue of the manuals, but I think the fact that when they're inadvertent, that is the problem. So I think that's something for people to think about. I'm thinking a little bit about some of the things that have been discussed, the other people have intervened on. So I work for an organisation that advocates for using early warning and early action as a way to meet the challenges of the climate change, of the climate crisis, to try and protect people from that won't be mitigated and can't be adapted. And every year those bits get worse. Insurance or any kind of pre-arranged finance is obviously a really important part of that. And it's one of the reasons that we engage really strongly with IDF. And I just kind of want to it's been really interesting for me to hear discussions in these last couple of days. And I kind of want to put a challenge to IDF members and insurers generally to think about your engagement and communication strategy with the rest of the ecosystem. We're trying to work in our organisation in REAP a little bit, trying to build better understanding and relationships, say, between the insurers and humanitarian and development. One thing I've heard from several people here this last 2 days is this idea that, insurance, and you're not saying insurance is perfect for everything, but an insurance type mindset to comprehensive risk management is really important. At least 5 people have said that to me. I have never heard that in any of the conversations where we try and bring the humanitarian and insurance people together. And there's a real set mindset, I think, in the humanitarian and development side. They're just trying to sell a product. So I don't think that really good motivation around how insurance can support practical risk management comes across strongly to your external stakeholders. And that's partly the responsibility of organisations like my own, but also for us as humanitarians and development actors to grow up a little bit. But I think this thing of pushing it out to other countries and also situating DRF instruments within the broader risk layering thing that we need to do is really, really complex work. And there's loads of potential with things like the Global Shield and the Loss and Damage Fund. But also my perception, kind of sitting as an observer in those processes, is there's a real feeling of shark circling, kind of like, or that's the perception of many countries, I think. Like loss and damage funding and Global Shield money, that's for the countries that have been affected by our actions. And I think that there's this perception, and in some cases it's correct, like, or the insurance company is going to come in and try and get that money for their products, or are the NGOs going to come in and try and get that money for their funds? And I think sometimes that's a real worry, but also it's an issue around how we engage climate vulnerable countries and climate vulnerable communities, and how we present our tools and instruments as a support to them. I think right now it feels like they've been approached as clients rather as you know, kind of allies. So I think that's something that's really important to consider, because I think there's so much nuance to the support that an organisation like IDF can provide that I don't think it comes across. And as my own organisation really wants to work to help with this as well. But I think, yeah, we need to have many more countries in these discussions as well, because it's for them to decide whether how they want to manage and finance their risk, and we have conversations about them without them all the time, and I think it's really important for IDF to show leadership and make sure that we don't continue to do that.
Thanks, Emma. You highlight a key challenge we have with the word insurance. So the three challenges I see. So Jürgen on the line just now, when he spoke about insurance, he talked about insurance in the form of products. And I think that most of us probably don't necessarily see what we're trying to do here like that, because when Selwyn spoke, he talked about insurance as an organising principle, which can be from welfare at one end of the spectrum to cat bonds at the other, and how we manage and share risk sustainably. And then what we spend most of our time doing is using kind of euphemisms like prearranged finance, which are not such radioactive words, but unfortunately, the very piece of vocabulary that's the heart of the IDF is a word that comes with so much preloaded preconception, and not always particularly good, that it can stymie so much. And I think one of the challenges is to figure out how to overcome that. There's a cluster of hands over here. I will come back to the panel, but I just want to.
Hi.
I want to exhaust the room first.
Thanks. I'll stand up so you can see me. Alicia Montoya from Swiss Re. I just want to invite everyone to measure your impact. Just start wherever you are. Just start measuring. Understand where you're at. Understand where you can have most impact. And head in any direction, but move as fast as you can, and in line with your strategy. So we all, I think this is my first IDF, hopefully not my last, but.
Well, that's up to you. You're always welcome.
Thank you. I'll take that. So I see a great diversity of talent and organizations here wanting to move towards our global goals. And, everybody brings something different to the table. Measure what you can bring, align yourself with your strategy. And for the private sector companies like Swiss Re, find that confluence between sustainable business and profitable business and act there. Because financing the transition is going to take trillions, someone said just now, probably hundreds of trillions if we really want to cover everyone and everything. And so it's going to take everyone, and we need to make it financially viable. So we need to find things that work financially as well, and there are plenty. So inclusive insurance is one example, building prevention into protection. There are many, many examples. We're all dabbling in them, and we just need to scale those. So everybody should just start measuring, and good luck on the journey. And if you want help with measurement, talk to me.
Thank you. Sure.
Hi, shall I stand? I'm Sean Tarbuck from ICMIF, and like Rowan, I've been on this journey almost the same amount of time as you, and I totally agree with your analysis to how far we have come. And we need to start using that word "we" a lot more as well, because we are all in this together. But the last couple of years, since you've had the conference last year, this conference, the step-ups each time are phenomenal. And my commitment was to bring a newbie along from Swiss Re. I think everyone should go away from this room and find a naysayer within their organization and bring them along to this event. Because I think Mami said it at the beginning, the problem isn't in this room. I'd say we've moved on as the IDF now to be the innovators, the cool kids, the ones that want to actually change the world because it needs to be changed. But we need more people in the room. We need a lot more of those decision makers. The challenge that I heard from the midterm review in on Sendai a couple of weeks ago in New York was the governments, and I'm not going to include the UN in this because they're not in that, the governments are the ones that are saying, we don't really want insurers involved at this stage. Let's bring some of those governments along. You know, Ingrid, please bring some of your best friends in other countries doing your job along, because they'll be so inspired by what this group does. You know, anyone that's a doubter within their own organization, whether it's the UN, whether it's the CEO of an insurance company, bring them along here. The energy and passion in this room should help us solve all of the big world's problems. And we've just announced some really big stuff, I think, this week as well. Or certainly I've learned even more, learn every time. But yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, but do it faster, do it quicker, and get to scale. I think that was your comment, wasn't it, about that? So, or is it Selwyn's? But yeah, it was fantastic. So well done on another great event.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sean. And if you can kindly, thank you. If you can hand okay, we'll go to Yoshi. Ekiswe, your hand was up. We'll finish with you in this corner, and then we'll head back there. On its way. It's on its way.
Yeah. Sorry. First of all, thank you so much. You know, I'm very happy to be included this IDF community, and very nice to see familiar face, but new face, and so on. So, one thing that Sean mentioned, and also Ethiopius mentioned, what is missing here, or in this warm community, is you mentioned we are doing some public good, something important for the public. But what is missing as an audience or participants is definitely not only emerging market or industry participants, but emerging market policy makers, government people, and so on, you know. They are extremely important, and we share the same goal, public goods, and they're passionate to do something good. But they definitely have to understand what insurance is, right? What protection gap is. And we are talking about so much important thing for them. So we need them to be included in this audience or here. That's one thing. And also another thing that Michelle, you mentioned, and also Mario mentioned, Mario is very much in his own way, you know, insurance is not attractive. But you said that insurance saw humanity. And when we created this IDF 1945, it's so much positive energy about insurance protection and so on. So what is maybe not missing, but what we encourage is insurance is very warm, not cold. Insurance is not head, but heart. This kind of why insurance is not so much appreciated. That, you know, we have to make insurance is hard. Insurance is warm. Insurance is something positive. You know, that's we have to keep messaging to not only emerging market but around the world. That was, you know, what I feel. What Michelle mentioned. Thanks.
Thank you, Yoshi.
Yoshi, if you could kindly pass the microphone to. Oh, you got one there, Ekiswe, and then if you can pass the microphone to Kathy, Ekiswe next, then Kathy, and then we'll head in that direction.
It's a bit related to what Yoshi had said. I think from my perspective, and I heard you, Emma, in terms of some of the concerns that you see, but I think that we need to step back, right, when we think about the communities that we are from, right? And I think about the value of insurance in the sense of we all want agency to make decisions, or we have the age, we want to live in a context where we have the freedom to make decisions and live a life, take risks, and thrive, right? The reality is that not everybody has access to the tools that do that. So I'm always concerned, right, about as a community, as a development community, humanitarian actors, that is a critical part of our objective. And in order to do that, you have to give people the tools, the different types of risk financing tools, so that they can continue to take risks. Because vulnerable communities, people live, smallholder farmers, they take risks every day. They know their risks. And as I said earlier, they just don't have the tools and the access. So the development community also has to get comfortable with the idea that part of the work is creating the systems so that these communities can have those tools and can independently operate and exist and create their own businesses and thrive in the way that they deserve to. Right? And we should not be uncomfortable with that conversation, because that is development. That is development, right? And so for me, I get, this is where, you know, my role as SG, quite passionate about this topic, right? Because if we believe that humanity and everybody deserve, a great life and all these different things, then we also need to think critically about what are the real solutions that are needed, right? And there is a price to that. But it's also an important element of allowing people to live in the same way that everybody else lives in developed countries, etc. So there's a bit of humility that I think that we need to engage in when we talk about how do we develop solutions in these contexts within the humanitarian community as well as the development community as well as the private sector, right? And that was the point that I was just going to make. So it's not a technical issue, right? It is a people community issue.
Thank you, Ekeswe. Well said. I think I can sense a mood and a theme is developing as we progress. It may well continue. Kathy, over to you.
Could be a movement, in fact. I wanted to get back to the issue of timing, and you said do it quickly and do it now. I was reminded in the session that we had about the micro insurance for the women in India that we, from conception to on risk, was 90 days. And so, yes, we don't have government a role in that, but we, in 90 days, went from the idea to insuring 21,000 women. And so I just want to put that as a marker. And I was also advised.
Oh, okay. Wendy. Sorry, we're having a logistics issue. There's a flight to catch. I hadn't realized.
Okay. I was also advised to use it by Veronica Scotti to wave it around a little bit to challenge people.
Yeah.
There was another, she used another word, but to wave it around a little bit and challenge people to move that quickly. That's my point. So with Blue Marble and Seva and Arshrak, 90 days, so put a challenge out there. Who else can do this in 90 days? Let's do it.
Got it. Gives us a chance for 2 or 3 things before COP. If I can just have a little quick interlude. Ethiopia, I know you've got to head for a flight, so if there's anything you wanted to, I don't know how urgent it is, but if you wanted to make an intervention and you may have to slip away.
There's a lot I want to say. I don't know that I'll have the time to say everything I want to say, but a couple of points I wanted to react to. First, there was a question as to what we should avoid doing, right? And I think we should avoid replicating what's already being done. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but I think it needs to be said because there's a tendency to try and replicate or to do something that others are already doing, and we end up crawling over each other and getting in each other's way. So I think focus on things that are not being done. The other thing that I think would be very useful as we're launching all these pilots and we're launching all these initiatives, don't let too much time pass before we actually evaluate how those projects, how those initiatives are doing. One of the most important functions I have found within the World Bank Group is the independent self-evaluation function, from which I learned a tremendous amount, right, and allows us to adjust what we're doing and based on the learning from projects. I couldn't agree more with measuring impact. Measure your impact, and if you need help. We have an impact framework, not to compete with you, but we're happy to actually have conversations about how we measure impact to the extent it's useful to others. And I guess the final thing I'll say is with respect to humanizing insurance. I mean, you probably have guessed from my name, I'm Ethiopian. And there is...
Come on. Oh. Now you say it.
There is, in Ethiopia, there's Maharab, which is basically a meeting on a weekly basis of a group of 10 to 15 people around a meal or a gathering. And for each time they meet, they put money in a pot. And they put money in that pot every week. And then when there's one of the members of that group has an event that happens, all that money goes to that individual, and then they start over again, right? It is very community-based, it's very social, it's very humane. It's that sort of face we need to put on
insurance. And then to Emma's point, we don't have the luxury of
talking about countries in their absence. I mean, ours is very much a relationship with the country. But what is interesting to me is we'll talk to them about the importance of the banking sector. We rarely talk to them about the importance of the insurance sector. We might talk about capital markets, but usually talking about debt and not equity, right? And you're right, there is a natural suspicion of the industry when they come advocating for their particular sector. So I think we need to think about the kind of partnership we can establish between institutions such as ours and you to make the case to governments about the importance of developing the insurance sector to deal with that aspect of lack of trust. And there's so much more I want to say, but I really have to run.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Ethiopius. I see okay, we're going to have one question from over here, and then we're going to go all the way over there, and that'll be, I think, the end of this session. We'll invite Ekeswe to... Oh, sorry, I'm being...
Steiner?
Oh, is Akim here?
No, there's a video that he had contributed.
Ah, I'm so sorry. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, we'll make sure we have that before your final intervention. So, Saoirse, you give me the nod when we need to do the video. You're in charge, Ekeswe.
So this is actually a question from the audience. Our first audience question, well, not quite, but the first one that made it. So George Brady is the name of the person. Yeah, virtual audience. The sector has made tremendous efforts over the years to tell the insurance story. Ethiopius will remember from his days at the SEC when the insurance perspectives came up in international policy-making discussions, just as he's walking out the door, but were regularly set aside. I appreciate that now we have a particularly rich opportunity to bring the unique value of the sector, to the first level discussions about how to help meet the climate challenges. What are the 2 or 3 main ways to do this, giving a first shot at Ethiopia's call for IDF to pursue a communication strategy?
Definitely. Okay, we'll hold that question because we'll get some other voices, but I think it touches on a key point about ideas and profile and our role in that as much as implementation. Bye. Kai, I think, at the back. Thank you.
Thanks, Rowan. Yeah, Kai Tuschen speaking for Resilience Secretariat. So when you mentioned 2025, the goal line of, or the 10-year anniversary of the IDF, I got to raise my hand because it's also the goal line of Vision 2025, the ambition framework of Resilience Global Partnership. And I heard some questions in the room around like the right ambition frameworks, and there you have one. So with that framework, we already have targets for specific impacts, and IDF and its members are already contributing. So I think it's important to raise the point that this is our joint ambition with the community. And even though we are now operationalizing the Global Shield and this big new initiative, we won't forget about that ambition framework. So in 2025, we also need to look at that. And I think the IDF's success is then also pouring into that, into the success story of Resilience Global Partnership. And I just wanted to flag that this framework is actually out there already, and many members are already contributing, and that's a good pathway to also visualize the impacts of this great initiative.
Super. Wonderful convergence of timescales. I think, yes, we have two. We've got Sid, and then the gentleman in the middle there.
Thank you. I was intrigued by your point, Michelle, around the 1945 and the energy piece. And it really resonated to me. I dealt and was heavily involved with the Canterbury earthquake, Kaikoura earthquakes. And one of the conversations that we had after that was you're judged by the community on how they've recovered. And there was plenty of people in Christchurch, not the majority, but there was plenty who were not happy for a number of reasons. But that's how they judged insurance. Through financial mechanisms, judged as a great success. In there, I feel there's a lot of lessons because of that energy, which is positive and negative, where as an industry, if we could capture that positive and negative from those recoveries and be able to share that with many other countries on a repeatable model basis, because many will go through the same challenges, but also that would enable the communities to start talking about insurance as being our voices rather than the insurance industry trying to tell the people how well we do. And I just wonder why we don't capture more about what we've done in recoveries that actually starts to change the dialogue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sid. And I'm sure we could bring some of those public-private climate and disasters programs in the developed world to this conference, because the challenges are all the same, and I think it would be very helpful, and maybe you could act as a bridge with your former role at the New Zealand Earthquake Commission to bridge that sort of gap, if I may. Sir.
Yeah. When I first joined insurance many years ago, there's something that I was told, and it's something that I still keep on saying, talking to my people, to friends. I was told that there is no product like insurance. There's no solution like insurance, because as soon as you paid your first premium, you've created an estate. So if anything happens to you, after having paid your first premium, the insurance company will normally settle the claim and pay your family. And there's no other product, there's no other industry that can do that. So insurance can do something that no one else does. In the morning we talked about, we basically provide cash flow. Banks will not give you any money until you have securitized and provided all the security they want. But when the insurance there's a claim from an insurance company, we'll pay. So we are instant. We provide instant cash flow to our clients, to our insureds. But coming to a place like, perhaps I'm the only one here from the Global South. And I got involved in IDF because of my other areas that I've been working on. And having been here, I've seen the difference that we can make. We were told in the morning that we are the second most regulated industry. I started my career in the UK selling life insurance. If I went back to UK now to sell life insurance, I would not be able to, because I would have to pass so many tests, so many exams, and qualify. But in Kenya, where we are, we rely on insurance agents to go and sell insurance. And for them, it's a living. They make more money, they don't need anything else except their ability to sell to people and manage people. And what happens is that we are learning a lot of, we are doing what we were doing in 60s and 70s in Europe. We're doing that in Kenya and Uganda and all the other countries. So IDF basically we can learn from IDF, we can expand it. But there's, I think, one area that we must perhaps even look at to bring in is bring in some of the regulators that we have in Africa, in Asia, and so on. But we have to choose the ones that should come here and listen and also talk about it, because it's the regulator that makes a lot of difference. And we can then rely on the goodwill that can be created between the regulators and the IDF and the practitioners, and see what solutions we can take forward to the people who need it the most. Because we find that we are one thing that we do in microinsurance, which is we are happy to say when we have insured a group of farmers, we are happy to see that there is a claim. Because as soon as there is a claim from the first relationship you have created and you have paid that claim, all of a sudden you create a relationship, and they understand that insurance pays. So it's something that perhaps we should consider and expand.
Thank you so much. Great ideas. And we've got a very strong regulatory group who have great relationships with that community. It'd be great to bring them next time. Any more questions on that side, or any more voices anywhere? Otherwise, yeah, I'm getting the signals. I know. I think now we move to the video, and then I'll ask Ekeswe to come up for some final thoughts with Michelle. So, run VT.
Dear colleagues and friends, Unfortunately, I'm unable to be in Zurich for this year's Insurance Development Forum Summit, as had been my hope. I would, however, like to share some brief reflections as we take stock of another year of impact across the world. That includes the use of cutting-edge risk models and data to inform our work, to the IDF's innovative approach to infrastructure investment. The forum and its members also continue to drive the thinking and conversation in key global processes like the new Global Financing Pact and the Global Shield. The tripartite agreement is an example of how public-private partnerships at scale can generate game-changing results. This collaboration between the IDF, BMZ and the United Nations Development Programme has already advanced 22 projects, everywhere from Ghana to Mexico. Through this work, it is estimated that some 64 million people worldwide will benefit from risk financing. This is a key component of the Insure Resilience vision that provides 500 million people globally with protection from climate and disaster risks by 2025. That is our aspiration. The potential for positive impact is even greater. Consider the fact that just 6% of losses related to disasters are covered by insurance in emerging economies compared to 35% in developed countries. At UNDP, our insurance and risk finance facility is currently working alongside 29 countries to roll out much-needed solutions, 22 of which are in partnership with the IDF and industry partners under the tripartite agreement. We are seeing a growing demand. Over the past year, we have received requests from a further 35 countries for a range of support on insurance and risk financing. As the climate crisis intensifies, our current resources are stretched, and yes, we realize unable to keep up with demand. This is one reason why we are working with the IDF Secretariat and industry colleagues on an enhanced version of the tripartite agreement. It aims to widen and deepen financial protection for some of the world's most vulnerable communities and countries. UNDP's partnership with the IDF through the tripartite agreement has provided a foundation for us to forge new partnerships, prompting new ways to solve the world's most acute development challenges. For instance, our partnership with Milliman is now extending vital actuarial expertise to 22 countries, helping them to better anticipate and get ahead of the many risks that now lie ahead. Dear colleagues, in this age of uncertainty, all of us must look at the world differently. That includes developing new tools and partnerships that enable communities to become more financially resilient to shocks and crises. In this respect, I welcome the fact that the IDF is expanding its membership, including recruiting more members from developing countries. These voices, perspectives, and expertise are crucial to design projects and programs that are responsive to the needs of communities while also having the greatest impact. Indeed, I am inspired by what we have accomplished together to date. In short, people across the world are looking to us to take decisive action and provide the buffer they need to protect their lives, their families' lives, and their livelihoods. That means challenging accepted wisdom and scaling bold new solutions that will change lives and drive progress across the global goals. With time being the essence, we must come to a common recognition that taking no risks is now perhaps the biggest risk of all. Thank you.
So I have to say, Achim was in the room because that intervention, I think, was quite spot on when we consider the conversation that we've just had. At the end of the day, this is a forum, and a forum is made up of member institutions. Member institutions are people. So there is an individual responsibility that we also have in terms of taking this work forward. When I opened on day one, it was, yes, the theme of action, ambition, impact. But it was also to say we need to get comfortable with challenging conversations. We need to challenge ourselves, challenge our assumptions, look at the lessons that we have learned, enjoy the successes, but also think about where next do we go? What is the next phase? of an evolution of this institution. Personally, I'm very proud of the community that we are building, the individuals that are part of this space, the engagement that we are undertaking through our country work, the tripartite, through institutions. There's a lot of work to be done, but I'm actually confident and more inspired at the end of this event that we are on the right track. So I'm not going to take away from Michelle's closing, but there are a few key things that I'd like to just point out for everyone before I hand over to you, Michelle, to take us to the end of this event. The first being, there will be an apéro after Michelle's intervention, and we welcome all of you to the terrace to join us. There's also a little surprise there, which I think is a great thing. I must also flag that the last time that I was here in September, I discovered something about this venue. There's actually a bowling alley of every respectable venue of this kind, right? And it's been kindly reserved for those of you who might wish to try or want to go and explore bowling. The last time I was in true competitive spirit, there were a couple of colleagues that we discovered the bowling alley with. I think Ivo Mensinger was one, Saoirse Jones, and Kip. And I have convinced myself that I won that game. You can interpret that however you wish. But I just wanted to flag that as options in terms of, part of this is also getting to know each other, right? Because we are a community, we're friends, we're colleagues, we might disagree on certain things, but we are all pulling in the same direction. The next thing, and it's extremely important, are the thank yous. First, I want to thank you, Michelle, obviously for your leadership in steering us through this institution, right? And also this planning for this session. But I also appreciate the many questions that you ask, the challenges that you pose to us in many of our bilateral conversations, and also the humor that you often deliver it with, right? Given the complexity of what we are engaged in. So just really to thank you for hosting us so graciously in your venue. The next is obviously this event would not be possible without the many colleagues who have helped to shape the substantive agenda. And there is an incredible amount of work that goes into this over many months to make this happen. And so I really want to thank Saoirse Jones at Zurich, who's been an incredible support in this journey. My colleagues, Kip, Eduarda, Pedro, Helen Wright, Nick, Stuart, and Gillian, our volunteer, right? Sorry, you might not want to clap. There's a lot of clapping at this. We'll wait to the end. There's an incredible ZDC team, Jackie, Michelle, Susan, Manuel, the tech team, the catering team, photographers, all who have done an incredible job. You see these events come up very smooth, seamless, but it's incredible the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. So I really want to thank all of you for your support. There's also the broader IDF leadership and membership, our STERCO members who have contributed to this endeavor, and some of whom have joined us over the past 2 days. So Akim obviously was in the room in spirit and definitely heard what we were saying. So we thank him for that. Ethiopis, obviously, who's left but was representing Hiroshi Matano. Antoine Gosé-Granville from AXA, who we heard from. Alex Mocharski, John Hancock from AIG, Ken Mungan from Milliman, Rob Westlin from the Corporators Group, Ingrid Hoven from GIZ, still with us, and Mami Muzutori, and the many STERCO members who all sent representatives to this event. So I really want to thank you for that. And of course, our OPCO leadership, Rowan, Ivo, Jan, and Olivia, for the incredible work in helping us to think through, right? Not only this event, but where do we want to go as an institution? And then, of course, the working group co-chairs and members who actually do support the implementation. And this is really important because we gather here and we talk about all these ideas, but there are real people who are having to carve out resources, put in time to implement. So thank you to all of them. And to the partner institutions, the public sector, private sector, the governments and country representatives who support us in implementing these programs. And quite a few of them were scheduled to be here, but the practicalities of even getting a visa is a challenge, right? So these are the very real things that people have to contend with when we think about bringing communities together. But at the same time, I would like to counter the narrative that we don't have representation in the room to some extent. Because there is representation in terms of government, but there's also representation in terms of people who come from these countries that are from the private sector or wherever else, right? So you have Assistant Secretary General Selwyn Hart. I must thank him for his presence over the 2 days and really helping us to think through some of the global discussions around climate. Yoshihiro Kawai and the team from Singapore who have come, right? It's important to acknowledge this. Ashok Shah from Kenya, who has spent the last 2 days with us and offering his thoughts. Masaki Nagamura and Takahiro Ono from Japan, who have also spent quite a bit of time, and this is not the first time, right? Alfredo Hansberg, who's come from Mexico for this event. Mr. Shafai from Morocco, who provided his interventions yesterday. Dr. Saima Shafiq from Pakistan, right, who wasn't able to attend yesterday because of the visa issue, right? Subhashish Barua from Bangladesh, who contributed to the breakout sessions. Eli Aloko from Nigeria, who was here also listening to the conversations that we're having. So let's think broadly about representation. And that is part of the work that we are also going to have to conceptualize as a secretariat in terms of how do we move this institution and broaden this conversation and what implementation could look like. So I think that I've been comprehensive in terms of my thank yous. And I apologize if I have left anyone out. Be assured that it's not deliberate. And with that, I would just like to say thank you to all of you who have made the deliberate choice, because it's deliberate, to be here. So thank you for that and your energy, inspiration, and the work that you are doing. And we really appreciate it, and we hope to see you next year. Well, I shouldn't say next year, next time we have the forum. So over to you, Michelle.
Sorry. It's quite an ungrateful task to intervene. You know, I always thought making the conclusion after such a meeting when I suppose everybody is adult enough to have your own conclusion. So I don't want to impose anything, but I just would like to share with you a few of the learning from the experience. But I always found that as a kind of a little bit strange exercise, because it has a tendency to say, now I will tell you what we discussed about, as if anybody was not around. By the way, I still owe an answer to a question. Rowan didn't give me the opportunity to answer the question, how would I judge the success of IDF? You know, your famous question to which no chance to answer for me. I must say, and I'm not ashamed of saying it, a bigger, because it can be measured, a bigger insurance penetration, really. That would be something, because, and I don't want to say a bigger insurance penetration. That we definitively play a more important role, whatever is the name of the institution playing this role. And then the other thing, which is very easy to measure, and which is absolutely catastrophic when you analyze that with your head, is the famous balance between the money we put on the table once the disaster is there and observed, and the money we put before to prevent to reduce at least the effect of the disaster. I don't know what is the current proportion. I've heard several numbers, but it's probably oscillated between 5 and 95. It's ridiculous. We are ridiculous. And if there is something that should change a little bit quickly, is that one. So I would not pretend that I would be very happy if it's 694 instead of 595, but it seems to be a long process. And maybe as an anecdote, and there are many other things a part of COPE meetings. I would like to feel a little bit less alone in the COP meetings. We are there. You look, and it's anybody with a few oil company, private oil company, but definitively not a lot of insurance companies. And I think that would be definitively a good message. That would also mean that there is a kind of acceptance of the other side that we can bring something to the table. Now I come to the summary you should register in your head of what we've discussed during the last 2 days. So honestly, it has been great 2 days. Also, the possibility to connect, and I'm very sorry that I had to sit more than standing during these 2 days, because I think what is wonderful is the fact that we can exchange experience and also exchange enthusiasm. Because I believe we have, all of us, a few adventures which have been very successful. We are human beings, a few failures, and exchanging that is something which is very positive. And I think this community is definitely a community in which this exchange is very valuable. So I hope it has been insightful for you, as it has been for me. But I would like to spend a few moments about the few clear message I've heard, or the few message I believe to have heard, and I would like to pass here. I think as a community we need to continue a few things that we do quite well, but maybe intensify. The first thing is that we need to strengthen the narrative of the convergence between insurance and disaster risk management and its contribution to society. There is considerable education and political engagement to be done here by all of us, and we must not be shy of this. Mario was very kind this morning when he said that there is not a systematic alignment between the political leadership and insurance. I can guarantee you, maybe not in all countries, but in a lot of countries, criticizing the insurance industry is a fantastic way to become popular if you're a politician. So that is something which goes beyond the fact that we do not understand each other. If we start to criticize each other to make us stronger, we don't go very, very far. So that is definitely something on which we need to make sure that we are not too much victim on your famous point on the fact that, of course, we intervene when things are going bad. Of course. So we're not there for a celebration. We're there normally for something on which we give a kind of financial help to people who are suffering a difficult situation. But I think the contribution, and we need probably to complement this financial contribution by something which goes beyond. That's also the customer focus that we need to have, but we need and to be very, very open about that, and we need to be proud about that. Again, we need to get off our caves. We need to consolidate the private sector engagement across global, regional, and domestic players to ensure that we all pull the same direction on what is a challenge that affects us all. The social and environmental difficulties which many, if not most, across the world face are real. We cannot ignore them if we are to be true to our fundamental purpose as an industry, that at its essence is to give people the opportunity to better manage risk so that they can live full, healthy lives. This is not a passive role. So that is something on which I also do believe that new technology, the famous debate that we have about new technology, which implies, of course, risk, cyber risk and things like that, but new technology can be also a fantastic opportunity for the insurance industry to touch more people. So let's make sure that we take advantage of that, not only covering the inconvenience, but using also the positive aspect to extend the coverage that we have in several countries, not only, by the way. I'm sure that a lot of the European and American client would be quite happy to get an accelerated digital relationship with their insurer if it means that these things are easier to be understood. So that's for the private aspect, and I think we need to drive greater engagement of government into the disaster risk financing space, given the urgency to strengthen our global risk management capabilities in a world that is fraught with increasing uncertainty. This is a challenge that crosses both developed and developing markets, and public and private, and we have to take responsibility for such engagement. I think one of the position that we could take advantage of as a player of the financial service industry, and as such being taken quite seriously by the business people, is to try to get rid of this kind of dogmatic discussion. All that is becoming so sadly religious. Do you believe in that? You don't believe in that? It's like 100 years ago, definitely some religion. We need definitely to be able to argue, to discuss, but apparently we've let that develop to a level in which negating that can be a plus on the political level. And we haven't learned yet the lessons from that. I believe to understand that we have probably explained the things a little bit too intellectually, instead of just sharing this kind of humanity that we all share on this planet. But it's quite impressive to see the number of, if I may say, mature countries, but not only them, where politicians make simply their careers on negating the fact that these risks exist. How is it possible? How is it possible? But okay, it is there. So we need to make sure that we can probably, as an industry, take advantage of the position that we have to make sure that this debate becomes a little bit more thought, and that we can speak about facts instead of speaking about beliefs. I don't think that there is not a lot. There's no reason for this subject to become religious. It's us all together. Finally, our ultimate task will be our ability to proactively be part of the solution through developing and implementing solutions to this real-world concern that we are witnessing. This holds true through the IDF and also through our institution. We will need to be bolder, more innovative, and open in our approach. Our call to action for this summit of ambition, action, and impact should be used as guiding forces as we consider these 4 areas where I believe there is a considerable amount that we can do together. This brings me to the importance of the work of the IDF and our focus on public-private partnership and helping to drive global resilience. I'm indeed very, very encouraged by the institution we are building, and importantly, the support of our partners and the rapidly accelerating engagement of industry across the board and the innovative partnership that are emerging. This represents an opportunity for all of us to align incentives, cultivate trust, incubate innovation, and deliver on the private-public collaboration which we all believe in, and importantly, for those who need it. And I agree with you, we need to be able to measure that also, because as a mathematician, almost an actuary, apologize. How could I negate such an important thing? You know, by the way, the fact of being an actuary, just 1 minute. The actuaries have a tendency to be in love of the product they develop. So they develop a product, they compute to the 3rd digit after the comma, and then somebody appears in front of them, a client. What do you mean? What does this one guy? He's distracting me from the development of my product. And that's one of the key elements of the insurance industry also. There is a lot which has been invested in the product, in the sophistication of the product, but probably not enough in understanding exactly if this sophisticated product is only pleasing the actuary who developed it or pleasing the client who would like to buy it. And that is also on the global challenge of IDF, something which makes definitively sense. We need to hear a little bit more. We need to be open to the request, and they are quite various, and not being only falling in love with our fantastic mathematical formula, even if we need them, of course. So I would like to thank my co-chairs. That's a moment in which I repeat all the thanking of my dear Ekosui, so I will try to avoid repeating them. My co-chair Hakim, Hiroshi, Ethiopis, who left us, my fellow SteerCo members. Rowan, you deserve definitely an additional thank you, so thank you very much. So the group co-chairs, the members for their relentless effort and passion that have helped to elevate our ambition and put us on track to contribute to meaningful change. There's an enormous thank you that I don't want to miss, is you, my dear Ekosui. No, really a deep thank you, and please say to Ekosui as much as you can that her new haircut is wonderful. I want also, like you did, to thank all those who have contributed to the success of this meeting of the IDF, and that's the moment in which I thank you, Sirsha, because she's definitely helping me quite a lot in this task. You know, the story is quite nice. You have your colleague, chairman of AXA, Denis Duven, who calls you, would you be interested? Of course, you jump in the opportunity, and then you realize, wow, there is a little bit of work to do. And then you, and then you look a victim, and you find a victim, and I'm very happy with my victim. So thank you, Saoirse. So let's continue on the work that we are engaged in, and let's accept sometimes a piece of frustration about, okay, maybe we missed something, maybe it doesn't go as quickly as possible, but as long as we keep the enthusiasm and the deep enthusiasm to achieve the progress that we have in mind, which are definitively the best way to define them is making more people happy and less people fragile. So let's do that. It makes a lot of sense, and it's, to be honest, it's very, very positive to have these kind of targets sometimes between a few quarterly results. It makes sense, and that's really the long-term target that we should pursue as an industry. So thank you to all of you for your energy and your positive energy. And bon apéritif.